All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Tom Schaad. We're at August Cellars in Newberg. It's June 21st, 2021. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
First question to get you started is why wine?
Why not wine? Wow. So I started my life back after college being a high school drama English teacher, and lasted for 3 years. Went and got a master's degree from the University of British Columbia in scene design and stage technology. Came back to Oregon, and the Oregon State Teachers and Standards and Practices Commission wouldn't accept my degree for continuing education. So at that point I did some professional theater, realized that I was never going to be good enough to get to be more than just at the bottom edge of that. Switched to manufacturing, worked in a manufacturing plant for 7 years, and got laid off in 2001. And in 2002, my aunt looked at me and Grace said, you know, Starr and Brown Winery is going to be for sale. And Rachel Starr was the winemaker for it, and she was also the original owner of Wines on Broadway up in Portland. And her partner apparently decided that it was more fun to renovate old buildings than it was to deal with federal taxes and compliance issues. And so I said, well, that sounds like a great idea, because that would get me back onto the family farm. My grandfather bought this ground in 1942. He was born on Old Pear Mountain in 1904. His parents came to Oregon in 1902. And I said, well, that's great. I don't have enough money to buy a winery. I turned to my brother and I said, Jim, how do you feel about a family-owned winery? And he said, let me go crunch some numbers. And I figured since he didn't say no, that was a good sign. And he came back and said, yeah, it's doable. Well, we couldn't agree on a buying price to buy back the old walnut dryer that had been converted into a winery. And so we actually built on this bottom acre of the farm that was too steep to actually farm efficiently. So we changed our business model from being a standalone little winery to an alternating proprietorship. So August Cellars is now home to 8 wineries. It's a 16,000 square foot facility. It's a 3-story gravity flow winery. And so, you know, why wine? Because wine gets me back onto the family farm. And we set it up as an S Corp, and hopefully the next generation is willing to actually, you know, step on board and take over activities and farming, and it'll all basically, we're holding everything in trust for the next generation, right? You know, long-term greed. I want the next generation to have access to all of this. So that's why wine.
What did you know about wine before this?
Oh boy. When Alvin came from the TTB to interview me about how to what did I know about winemaking? I looked at him and said, well, I've been drinking wine since I was 21. He kind of rolled his eyes. I grew up here, and quite literally, I was the youngest of 4 kids, and when I turned 21, my family, you know, we went out winery tasting Thanksgiving weekend. We were part of the consumer. We were, you know, going out. We hit, you know, the 4 or 5 wineries in a day on the day after Thanksgiving, and we were all adult children. And you know, as when I graduated, you know, from college, then we were all, you know, these adult households, and you know, it was amazing how when you pull up to a winery with you know 5 adult households, how you could buy 5 cases of wine and get a great price, and you spend all of your alcohol budget in one day for the entire year. But you know, you have great wine to drink over the course of the year, yeah. So you know, talking to winemakers from 1985 until, you know, we started our winery in 2002. So that means 2001 we were still out, you know, going winery hopping. So, you know, What do I know about wine? I know what I love. I know the history of the Oregon wine. I know that what makes Oregon unique is the fact that we're willing to talk about the things that are good, the things that we wish we could have done better, and laugh at our own foibles. That's why Oregon wine. That's what I know. So what? From '85 to '90 to 2001, I was the most important part of the industry. I was a consumer. Now I run a building that has 8 wineries in it. So I'm not as important as I used to be.
Tell me about, we'll start with the property first. Tell me about, you mentioned a little bit of the history of this property. Tell me a little bit about, kind of fill in some of the details about the history of the property and what it looked like when you bought it back.
So this land, my grandfather bought in 1942. And when we started the winery in 2002, grandfather was 98. Well, 90, yeah, I guess 98, if we're not 4. And then we looked at him and said, okay, well, this deal to dry back the walnut dryer fell through. Since he was also he was a stockholder, it was a family-owned company. He was part of he owned some stock in it. We said, well, what about building on the bottom of the orchard? And he said, well, that's okay. So we moved the tractor shed from where we're sitting, quite literally, halfway up the orchard, and we hired, we did our first 2 crushes, 2002, 2003, down at Wildman's Winery, where we were essentially custom crushes as we were receiving fruit and making wine, and Rachel Starr was our winemaker. So when we hired her, as well as buying some equipment. Seemed like a great way to solve that problem. And my brother, looked over her shoulder and learned a lot, and became our winemaker in 2004. And so this farm used to be walnuts and prunes and black caps, black raspberries. And today it's still walnuts and prunes. The prunes are a holding crop right now. We don't know what to do with that 7 acres. I'm hoping the next generation has some brilliant ideas. And the black caps are now a 12-acre Pinot Noir vineyard, La Cantera 2, which is leased to Walnut City Wineworks.
I'm curious, you mentioned kind of a long time as a consumer before starting this. I'm curious about that. Tell me about your impressions of Oregon wine and of the industry before getting into it on this end.
Now I have to walk carefully now. My favorite winery being a consumer, was Serendipity Cellars. Glenn and Cheryl Longshore, they lived down in Airlie. Their winery was quite literally just uphill from Airlie Winery, which is still in operation. Glenn did Marichal Foch. Bought it from Meadows Vineyard, which was a vineyard that was started in the mid-70s. I want to say like 76, 77. I think Glenn's first year was maybe 79, 78. And he did Foch, and it's a hybrid grape, so nobody knows what it is. This big, earthy, rustic red wine that lasts forever. And he, on Thanksgiving weekend, would do a vertical. So you would go in, you'd have one tasting fee for this and the second tasting fee for the vertical, and you would taste from the beginning going to the most current vintage. And so you would sit there and you would discover that Marichal Foch was a grape that was like, oh my God, don't drink it for 5 years, and if you can wait 10 years, you have this beautiful, beautiful wine. It throws sediment sideways as well as putting it on the cork. It's purple. It's not Pinot by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably one of the best grapes that grow in Oregon to make a port out of. because it's such a big, hearty red wine, which is what you want for port. And so Glen's last year was 1999. And so we laughed by saying, well, you know, so we could go to Meadows Vineyard in 2002 and we could start to make Maréchal Foch. And we've been buying Foch from Meadows Vineyard since 2002, and this is 2021. And Naomi just told me last year that she's second generation in terms of, you know, her husband is the son of the original owners, that they're going to pull the vineyard out this year because it's a lot of work and it's harder to find labor, and so we'll buy fruit, you know, this year, and this will be the last year that we get Maréchal Foch from them, and then we'll have to figure out what do we do. But as it stands right now, you know, we've got, you know, we're selling old Foch on the tasting room counter as the current vintage. We've got port still in barrel, so I feel like I'm okay for the next few years as I think about where do I go to find more Foch for port. So as a consumer, you know, you get to walk in, you get to meet these winemakers, you get to, you know, you get to ask them the questions. They get to wax poetically about what they're passionate about. Tasting wine when it's young, because, you know, in the 80s it was, you know, still the same thing going on now for all the small wineries. I bottled it, I need to release it because I need the money to pay for harvest and I need the warehouse space to put this next wine. So, you know, Thanksgiving weekend was great, but, you know, you learned eventually that, oh, well, look, if you can hang on to it, if you know how to cellar wine, it gets better and better and better. And so one of the things that we actually do is because we built enough building to be our own warehouses, we actually warehouse our wines. So it's 2021, my current vintage on Pinot Noir is 2015 Willamette Valley. You know, I don't think anybody in the valley is doing that. I think that anybody who's doing that is calling it a library wine. It's our current release. It goes to Massachusetts. You can find it in, you know, restaurants and grocery stores and bottle shops in Boston. And it makes us unique. It says that we love our wine, but we love it when it's a little bit older. Yeah, but it was fun because, you know, you walk into these, you know, I mean, you know, small tasting rooms, homemade food. You know, people were doing things. We'd always, you know, I mean, you know, Spring Hill Winery in Salem, they did brats and Zwiebelkuchen and Federweizen. So you were drinking half-cooked Riesling with your onion kuchen and your brat first for lunch on the day you're going out wine tasting. I mean, how much fun is that? I think they still do that. And they've been around, boy, I think since 90, 91, somewhere in there. And yeah, it's you know, it's fun to see the people who got in early and you know, found a niche way to market it. And it's tougher now because, you know, the new consumer doesn't have the same sort of brand loyalty that I think that my generation had. You know, we would go back and we would hit, you know, 3 or 4 same places and look at 1 or 2 new ones. But, you know, we always went back and you know, you had that relationship. And now with 900 wineries, you don't have that, I don't think. There, I said nice things and I didn't say anything bad about anybody. Okay.
Nailed it. Tell me about then how this place came to be in terms of initial design and thought and what you wanted it to be from the beginning. What was the initial plan to have it be an alternating proprietorship, or is that something you just sort of grew into because of the space?
So when we did not successfully purchase the walnut dryer, which would have been an awkward space because you know, the drying tunnels meant that there was a sloped floor on the main floor. They'd lifted it up and finished out the dirt basement and poured a concrete basement. The crush deck had a low roof. So there were lots of strikes against it in terms of, look, it's a barn that had been converted into a winery. So when we didn't agree the price, we turned around and we said, okay, well, we have a chance to build what we think is like an ideal winery. And so here we were with the gall of one harvest under our belts, where the de-stimmer basically was shredding Pinot Noir as it came out there. So it was macerating the fruit, wonderfully, if you want to make a big Pinot and if you want to age it for a while. If you're trying to make a delicate thing that you're releasing soon, it was not so much. And the hillside here where we couldn't farm is a 22-degree slope. So even with an orchard crawler, even with the tractor that we had, it was really too steep and because the road too narrow to actually farm very well. So we had the tractor shed here, and there was an old cherry tree and an old pie cherry tree, and we wound up picking out like 7 walnut trees out of the orchard in order to develop the parking lot. And every floor is a ground floor, and there's a drop, of 11 to almost 14 feet between each floor. And so, gravity flow winery. We hired an architect, the same architect that did Carlton Winemaker Studio, so Boxwood out of Seattle. They are good at doing, medium-sized wineries. They really focused on, sustainability. While we're sitting here with LED lights on over the top of us, we can actually, if we turn the lights off, we can still see. It'll be a little bit darker. But gravity flow winery. Every floor is ground floor for driving out, built into the hillside. So the barrel rooms are daylight basements. We have a warehouse on the second floor which lives underneath the crush deck. The crush deck has a clear roof. Indirect lighting, north windows. And we laughed and we said, if Carlton Winemaker Studio would have had a real hill, it would have looked like us. We're Studio 2.0. There were so many things about what they did well at the studio. It was easy to just say, I like that too. So for example, our crush line is elevated off the crush deck. So the only people that are on the crush deck during harvest is a winemaker and a forklift operator. All the workers are safely up on a balcony area where they can't get run over. They're not going to be walking in front of a forklift that has 1,000 pounds of fruit on it. So it's a lot safer during harvest. So it wound up being, if we're going to build a winery, let's build it to be most efficient. Let's build it, if it has to be sold. It's a 16,000 square foot facility. It's perfect for doing 10,000 cases a year, which is about what we do between all of the wineries in the building. And we have so we have 4 barrel rooms that each barrel room typically has about 2 people in each barrel room. So do you want it to be heated to get through mallow? Do you want it to be, what temperature do you want to cool it to in the summertime? You're only negotiating with one person, unlike Carlton where you have however many people in one really big barrel room and everybody has to agree what temperature it gets to be. We don't really have that problem here because you only have one roommate and it's a whole lot easier to come to reach an agreement. So we also bought our own bottling line because these are all smaller lot wineries. So you're not trying to negotiate and schedule the bottling truck in. You could. We have built it so that the hookup is all there. We built it for flexibility. Absolutely built it for flexibility. So the plan was, if we build a winery that also collects rent as a landlord, then I can sell wine at a more affordable price. Because I've had one job in my whole life where I did not have to live on a budget. And it's not this one. It is not this one.
Tell me about the August Cellars label and about sort of what you wanted to do with it as part of the bigger scheme here.
So in order to be an alternating proprietorship winery, you have to have a host winery. So we have to be a winery. Otherwise, we can't have an alternating proprietorship. Okay. We could own a winery and then lease it to somebody else who would be the host winery. So for August Cellars, so our concept was, our belief was that we wanted our wine to be a Tuesday night wine. There are 52 Tuesday nights in a year. We want to be the wine that you reach to and you go, wow, Tuesday. I thought Monday was yesterday. And it should be affordable. You only have one 35th wedding anniversary, one 50th wedding anniversary. We don't want to be that winery. There's enough people out there who want to be that winery. Because we hold our red wines, it's a lot harder to send our wine in to get it reviewed because the national press, the national magazines, they want to look at a whole vintage. So they want to look at, oh look, it's 2021. We want to review all of your 2020s. Well, our 2020, would still be in bottles sitting in the warehouse, and we're going, it wouldn't be ready. When we're going like, well, our current vintage is 2015. We'll send you that one. They're like, oh no, we want to do the most. Well, that's our current vintage. Even the Oregon Wine Press has a problem with that. And it's like, no, we want to look at 2019s and 2020s. No, we're 2015. It's so we're a little out of step there, which probably is a good way to describe the whole operation. Is we're a little out of step with the Oregon wine industry as a whole. Pinot Noir is nice. It's not the only wine out there. I love big reds, Maréchal Foch. White wine should be part of dinner. It should be food. What does our wine go best with? It goes best with dinner and people. So we've done Riesling and Gewürztraminer and Chardonnay and Pinot Gris. We've bought Merlot and did that for fun. We bought Cabernet and did that for fun. Zinfandel. We've got Zinfandel downstairs in the barrel room right now. We'll be bottling that 2019 Zin this summer sometime. We do port. We do port because we love port. People were telling us, oh no, port has to be in a small bottle, it has to be in a split. And we're like, it doesn't go bad. You open it up, you've got 3 months to finish the bottle, 4 months to finish the bottle. And the cost of the split is twice as much as the cost of that regular bottle. So we put ours in an adult-sized container because it's an adult wine. It's and zero resistance by consumers, right? They're like, oh God, thank God it's in a real bottle. It's creative to make it be, hoity-toity and an elite appeal, but that's not who we are. I mean, I'm the youngest of 4 kids. I've been knocked off my high horse so much that I don't know what it looks like anymore. And the other thing was, I looked at my brother, and my brother is like, okay, so we're going to build an alternating proprietorship. So the whole goal behind that for us is we're making money. Our wine can be more affordable because we don't have to pay all of our bills off of our sales. We're a landlord. And we can turn around and we can say to our tenants, we know we could charge you more, but we think your wine should be affordable too. So we've got this sort of target that we like to charge, but we're nowhere near the high end that it could be. I mean, for a gravity winery where the barrel rooms are underground and the humidity is always up around 85 to 95%. And if you don't turn the chiller unit on, it gets all the way up to 66 degrees down there. And it drops down to 58 in the wintertime. It's like, here is an ideal place to make Pinot Noir. We have a vibrating sorting line, we destem, it's all gravity down to the barrel rooms. You have access to your own bottling, the bottling line where you can bottle, a half day's worth of stuff. you don't have that huge expense of the truck coming in, you know. And so it's kind of like paying it forward. You know, we developed this great building, and you know, other wineries that make their wine here get that advantage. We don't force them to come be part of Thanksgiving weekend. We invite them. If they don't want to be, that's fine. We don't want a cranky winemaker here. That's not what we're looking for. It may not be your business model. You might feel like, well, my Pinot Noir is going to be competing with everybody else's Pinot Noir, so I don't want to do that. I don't know. But you know, for the consumer, they get one tasting fee. You get in the door and you taste however many winemakers are there that weekend, and you know, it's you buy it all at once, and so you get that case discount on 5 wineries. I mean, what a great deal is that for the consumer? Yeah.
How much of that was sort of in the original plan, and how much of that has sort of changed and evolved over the 20 years?
It really started out as a big chunk of the, I mean, you know, the big chunk of it, you know, having, you know, been 2002, so the studio was open in 2001. So as a consumer, we got to go as a consumer to the studio, to the Carlton Winemaker studio. So absolutely, you know, the idea of walking around to different tables and tasting people's different wines, but some of them didn't seem really super happy to be there. Maybe it's because they wanted to be winemakers and they didn't want to be salespeople. Maybe it was because, you know, it's a long time standing there and you don't know, and everybody's asking the same question, and you get tired of answering the same question. You know, winemakers are not kindergarten teachers. Although, really, having been a school teacher for 3 years, you know, let me talk about wine. What is the history of Oregon wine? The history of Oregon wine is not Papa Pinot. That's a great place if you're in the Willamette Valley to start. But the history of Oregon wine is, you know, Peter Britt. It's Southern Oregon. It's the notion that at one point in the 1890s, what is now the Oregon Department of Transportation actually created a flyer talking about how the Rogue Valley was going to be this beautiful highway of chateaus doing wine. You know, anybody who starts the story with Papa Pinot and Erath and Adelsheim and, you know, Ponzi, and they ignore Honeywood. Honeywood's been around since 1934, 33. I mean, 33 was the end of Prohibition. So you start the next year. And what do you make wine with? You make wine with what's available, which is fruit wine. There were grapes planted in the Willamette Valley long before Prohibition, but they got tore out because they didn't make good grape juice. They didn't make good jelly. They were wine grapes, not Concord, not what, you know, made nice jelly. So they got pulled out, and farmers put in, you know, other things, because Prohibition in Oregon started 3 years before nationally. So we had a long time of farmers not making money off of grapes. So you change it, you pull it out. But you know, the story starts so far before 1965 that to not talk about the fruit wines, to not talk about, you know, look, Peter Britt, he had a half an acre of grapes down on the bottom of his property in town and 15 acres out there on the farm. And so when the revenuers showed up, because they heard he was making wine and selling it, they said, oh, it's just for friends. He points to that, you know, that little half acre down there at the bottom of the hill. And then when the revenuers, well, let's go out to your farm and see the 15 acres. Oh yeah, there's your first bonded winery in Oregon. We don't tell that story up here because we're the Willamette Valley. We're Pinot Noir. Willamette Valley is Pinot Noir. Well, but we're also Riesling. You know, why are we not known for Riesling? It's because the early winemakers didn't know how to tell farmers Riesling is like apples. If you don't thin the apple tree, you're going to have small green apples. Farmers understand the notion of thinning their fruit so that it's more and riper and more flavor. But we as winemakers didn't convey that message to to farmers who we convinced to grow fruit. So that's why we're not known for Riesling. We should be known for Riesling. Oh my God, we should be known for Riesling in this valley. We have perfect climate for it. So now I don't remember what the question was anymore.
It was a great answer either way. So tell me about learning winemaking, learning for your own self, your own brand. How long did it take you to figure out what you wanted to make, how you wanted to make it, and then how to make it?
Wow, when you start a winery, it's really a crash course masterclass. There's something about starting out at 1,500 cases that everything is repetition. The bad habits you learn are the bad habits that the winemaker teaches you. So what Rachel Starr said, this is why we do it this way. That's my standard, right? The joke is that everybody who comes in the building, as long as their bad habits don't conflict with my bad habits, they can keep them. If their bad habits conflict with mine, then it has to go. So I had one winery that moved into the building, and they wanted to use paraquat to sanitize equipment and hoses and the barrel rooms. I'm going, you can't. You're going, but it's food grade. I'm going, it's bleach. Bleach, pressure-treated lumber, mold equals corked wine. Equals, and you can get it in your barrels. So we've already got the pressure-treated timbers, we've already got the mold, so no bleach in the building. Well, what do I do? I say, welcome to ozone, welcome to caustic and citric. It's a little bit more elbow work, but it's not. So he was like, oh, so that was a bad habit that didn't agree with mine. So it's, I laugh because it's so it's a master class in repetitiveness, and you learn from mistakes. You learn from, well, maybe we shouldn't have said that to the grower because he keeps bringing us fruit every day. It's like, oh my God, 2003, we wound up, apparently we contracted for the whole vineyard. And we finally said, stop picking, go sell it to somebody else. Really, we gave fruit away to Wild Winds that year because, we were running at a ton an hour. And when you have 20 tons of fruit delivered today and 18 tons of fruit delivered the next day from the same vineyard, it's like, okay, so we're working 10-hour days, 12-hour days at a ton an hour. It's just sitting there. In 2003 was a hot year. So we've got this whole, carbonic maceration thing going in the fermenters already before we go ahead and process it. You learn from, wow, well, maybe unbridled enthusiasm is not the right choice if you're running a winery, because you still have to turn around and sell it. But you also get the joy of saying, I really want to make port. So our 2003 port was a half barrel. Bought this Hungarian half barrel from Vadai down in southern Oregon. I make very good barrels. These are the best barrels. You love them. And we didn't, it's like, so in order to get the high proof alcohol to stop fermentation, my brother said, really? I said, yes. And so he went and he cleaned out all 5 liquor stores in Salem out of their Everclear. Because in order to get the right volume, you had to have however many fifths that was. And the only way to get it was to buy it already tax paid and dump it back in. And so here we are siphoning out into our food grade garbage can, which we had drawn a line for, this is the volume that we need. And as we're siphoning it out, Laura Volkman and I are swirling bottles of Everclear in to stop fermentation. And we let it sit for a couple of days to settle out. And it was like, wow, what a beautiful port. It had overnotes of cocoa and mocha and just this thing of beauty. And the barrel kind of weeped out because at 18% alcohol, 17.5% alcohol, the grain, it doesn't hold quite as tightly as when it's 14 or 12% alcohol. So that was like, oh, look at that, weepy barrel now, huh? But you know, I love making port. I love drinking port. It's you know, so you learn by doing, and hopefully keeping good enough notes that next year you know not to do that or to do that again, because every experiment is what, a 3-year experiment, right? You know, unfined, unfiltered red wines. What's the risk? Sediment on the back of the cork? I'll live with that. Because that means that the wine is doing something. It's aging in the bottle. It's not just going away. It actually gets better till it hits a peak, and then it starts to fade. But it makes it last longer in the bottle when it's unfined and unfiltered. It's not made for now. It's not made for drink now. But we make a Gamay Noir now, and that's a drink now wine. And you know, you look around and you have, you know, in this building you have 8 winemakers or 7 other winemakers. You want a masterclass discussion of what's going on and what you think are going on. You know, what about chapelizing? What about, you know, adding a little bit of water? What about adding acids? You know, and everybody's doing it, or is looking at it, and they're looking over everybody else's shoulder at the same time. You know, the joy of the Oregon wine industry. There are no secrets, because it's like making meatloaf. My mother makes the best meatloaf. I bet your mother makes a really good meatloaf too. If I were to give you my mother's meatloaf recipe, it would not be as good as my mother's meatloaf. Because it boils down to what she thinks a medium onion is and what it means by until moist, or until it sticks together, or to flavor. And that's Pinot Noir in a nutshell. You know, how many clones of Pinot Noir are there? 100, somewhere around there. How many different barrel reps are there out there? Barrel makers, toast levels. How many different yeasts are there that you could use? Are you using native yeasts? Are you inoculating? Do you use enzymes? Do you not use enzymes? Do you put wood chips in during fermentation, or do you not? I mean, all of these things. And so it's all about what I want to do and what my taste buds are and how I view it. And that's what makes Pinot so unique. That's what makes the Oregon wine industry so unique, is we're willing to like talk about what we did and share with each other. Here, taste this. What do you? And you know, there's people out there with better noses than I and better taste buds than I. But still, it's that whole, you know, what do you do? What do you like? Because ultimately, it boils down to you have to be your own biggest cheerleader. You're the one who's out there selling it. You know, get the distributor excited about it, get their staff excited about it, and suddenly, you know, your Pinot Noir is everywhere in Boston, and America's Test Kitchen says, and for that lighter-bodied red wine that you can chill, we recommend August Cellars Pinot Noir, because they don't do paid advertisements. They do what's readily available in Boston. So it's like, oh wow, that's exciting. So that, I mean, you know, so the, you know, you know, so right, this last year, 2020, smoke everywhere. I mean, everybody was talking about how do you deal with that? Everybody. And people like Chris Dixon, Twill Cellars, who bought fruit from Southern Oregon and had smoke impacted Syrah a couple of years earlier, you know, he was the building expert. Because he had already fought through it. So, you know, what was his plan? What was he doing? And it was, you know, great to have, because, you know, we all of our ships rise together in this building. You know, when one of the wineries in this building gets national press, you know, you come to visit them in Oregon. Where do you go to? You go visit Crowley Wine at August Cellars. You go visit Ovum, you know, at August Cellars. Yeah, it's so it's, you know, it's like, you know, living with a master class all the time.
So let's talk about, I have a couple questions based on that. We're going to start with the Tenant Wineries first. You've had a lot over the years. Tell me about what you're looking for in a Tenant Winery here, and maybe what they're looking for out of you, and how you make the relationship work.
The biggest thing about being a tenant winery, about being a winery in an alternate proprietorship, is to have the ability to wait your turn. Harvest is basically first come, first serve. So, you know, Potter's Vineyard is a quarter mile up the hill. They could, in theory, you know, bring down a truckload of fruit and be the first fruit in that day. Well, except you have to have the whole vineyard in. So, so if it takes a while to get all 3 truckloads down, or 4 truckloads loaded and back down the hill here, then somebody else might sneak in ahead of you because they had, you know, more people picking, and they started an hour earlier, even though they had a half an hour to drive to get here. And so, it's that whole, the first vineyard that's completely in is the first fruit that we run. We had 2 winemakers who got together and rented a 40-foot refrigeration container back in, I can't remember what year it was, a long time ago. And my brother and I looked at that and said, well, that's a brilliant idea. And so the next year, we took that over. We just incorporated that into, this is something that the building thinks is really important, so that if you want to chill your fruit overnight, or if you want to cold soak your macro bin, you can fit it in there. The rule is fresh fruit has priority over processed fruit. But so there's a schedule. So there's, and everybody like signs up for, they say, I think I'm going to have my fruit, I'm picking my fruit on Thursday. They write it on the chalkboard. They estimate how much fruit it is, and then if there's a special need. Special needs are, I want to do, I want to do an extended soak on my rosé. So does that mean that you load it directly into the press and tie the press up, or do you load it into a macro bin and then bin dump it into the press after it's sat for 6 hours? So my job is the logistics side of that, to figure out how does this all run. It also means that because of my theater background, I know that nothing good happens after 11 o'clock at night. There is nothing good that happens in a manufacturing facility or in a construction facility after 11 o'clock at night. So we have run 2 shifts. I refuse to run a shift past 11 o'clock at night, because that's when accidents happen. That's when people make mistakes. That's when doors get opened. That's when things go wrong. I've spent too many years doing professional theater where you're painting at 3 o'clock in the morning, and after a while you're really not painting so much as you're like just kind of like dabbing at things with a paintbrush and thinking to yourself, I could be asleep. I could be asleep. I could be asleep. Now I'm just going to put a shadow there. Now I'm going to be asleep. No, it's not. And so, the people who, are young and idealistic, I'm going to punch down 3 times. I need to punch down at 2 a.m. It's like, if you do, you have to bring somebody with you, because you have to have a lifeguard. You cannot be in the building alone during harvest. You need to have a lifeguard. So what tenants look for is, an affordable place, a place that will allow them to make wine the way they want to make wine, to whatever crazy notions they have, let that happen. And what we look for is somebody who is willing to bite their tongue when they're mad because they want to do it now and there's somebody in front of them. And it's a tightrope to walk, but it's that whole, anybody who comes in here for one season as a one-off, which we've had before, they don't get the concept that just because you're trying to do 30 tons because you made a mistake and broke contract and your winery wasn't ready yet, you are no more important in terms of where you stand in line as Laura Volkman Vineyards, who does, 5 tons of Pinot Noir. She's actually probably, in my book, more important because she's going to make wine here next year. Whereas you I'm helping you out because your general contractor made a mistake and grapes were early that year and you're upset because you're hoity-toity and everything else, we should all bow down to you because you're wonderful and you're going to give me a lot of money for doing 30 tons, but you still have to be able to play well with others. It ultimately boils down to it's my ball, it's my rules, right? If you can't live by that, then you need to move on. Yeah.
So you are kind of a kindergarten teacher then, still.
Or herding cats, one of the two. Probably herding cats is a better description. And no, because my brother was actually much better at being the principal than I was. Because I'm out there in the trenches trying to organize everybody, and I don't have time for tomfoolery. I get kind of short during harvest, just like everybody else. But you all take a deep breath, and you get to the end of harvest, and you bury the hatchet, and you pick up and you go on.
You mentioned selling wine, obviously a difficult thing for many people. Tell me about selling your wine, especially making a lot of non-Pinot varietals. Where have you found markets? Where have you found consumers, and what are they looking for from you?
Boy, they're looking for Pinot Noir. They're looking for Pinot. Boston is my #1 market. They buy Pinot Noir almost exclusively. A little bit of Riesling, a little bit of Chardonnay. Everything else, if you can't sell it out the front door, it's not going to get sold. Maréchal Foch is a grape that everybody says, I've never heard of that before. And gee, a grape that's been around since before World War I, is a hybrid grape. And named after a field marshal from World War I because he was a hero. But it's not, unless you're from the Finger Lakes district of New York or Ontario, Canada, you've never heard of it. Maybe BC, and nobody can pronounce Gewürztraminer, so nobody wants to order it. And it's definitely because of all of that spiciness to it and the aromatics. It's people either love it or hate it. There's not, Foch is probably the same way. Americans, sadly, either it's trendy and we go for it, or it's one of the 5 things that I know. But it's pretty rare to find Americans who, I really like Heath bars. It's like, we all like Hershey's, we all like Nestle, we all like the big brands, we all like the things we know. We don't like the strange and unusual because we don't know what to serve it with. We don't know what do we do with it after we buy it. That's probably the biggest resistance to port is, well, what do I do with it? Well, you open it with Thanksgiving, and you have it with the pumpkin pie and the walnut pie, and then if you have any left over, you roll right into Christmas and the gingerbread season, and you have it with that. And it's just, they just don't know, right? So I don't know what to do with it or how to pronounce it. I don't necessarily want to buy it. It's like you can't sell Pinot Gris in Florida because it's Pinot Grigio, because of all the Italians that moved from New York, I guess. I don't know. And you try to explain, well, it's the same grape. The difference is the Pinot Grigio is lean and more acidic driven, and Pinot Gris is more fruit driven. It's fruity and flavorful and goes with, it's not supposed to be paint thin. It's not supposed to strip paint. Gruner Veltliner is another one. I would love to make Gruner Veltliner. I think that's one that the Oregon could grow really, really well. But another German pronunciation, right? Grüner, umlauts. Umlauts are the death of a wine in America. Gewürztraminer, Gruner Veltliner. It's a horrible thing. You sound like a foghorn when you say the name of the grape. Maybe you can't sell it. I don't know. So the taste room is crucial, and that's gotten more segmented and harder to reach the public with now because social media. Social media is nothing but a bunch of white noise. You know, it's how much spaghetti do you throw at the wall and stick? You know, and you don't know what sticks and how it sticks. I so miss the Oregonian when it was a daily newspaper and had a readership, because you could put an ad in there. They would do Oregon wine country. They would pull out supplements, and that drove hundreds of people to my tasting room. And where we're located from Portland, we see people at the beginning of the day and we see people at the end of the day, because the tide washes past us and it washes back to Portland. So quite literally, we've always had this lull around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:30 to 3:30. There's nothing going on. We all get our lunch breaks then. We can take naps. It's all wonderful. But you know, we have people, you know, knocking on the door at 10 to 11. Are you open yet? And then we have people coming in at 4:45. Can we still taste? And it's just, you know, our location is not conducive to the middle of the day. Maybe somebody an hour down the valley is more lucky for that, right? I don't know.
So with all the varietals, especially ones maybe people are unfamiliar with or unable to pronounce, how much of your job then is consumer education or convincing people to try something they're not comfortable with?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the big part of it right there. And you know, and so in the wintertime when there's no consumers, when not a lot of people come out, we just do an August Cellars flight, which pre-pandemic was 6 wines. During the pandemic, currently it's 4 wines. So you get to pick 4 wines off of the flight of 8. So you could do all red, you could do all white, you could do half and half. And then in the summertime, when foot traffic picks up, we then add the building flight, the tenant flight, which is typically all red. And you'd be surprised how many people who walk into a winery and say, oh my God, do you have anything but Pinot Noir? We've been tasting Pinot Noir for 4 days. It all tastes the same now. And we go, well, we have an artisanal Gamay Noir, we have a Cabernet, we have a Grenache, we have a Marichal Foch, we have a Zinfandel, we have a Port. They go, oh my God, I'll take all of those. You know, because they're not Pinots. You know, as wonderful as Pinot Noir is, you're slicing the difference between this red fruit and that red fruit. And while I grew up picking berries, and I can tell you the difference in flavor profile between a Loganberry, a boysenberry, a Marionberry, a Himalayan blackberry, a monsterberry, a black raspberry, a red raspberry. And I can tell you what they taste like at different parts of the growing season, when they're early and when it's late, and the overripe fruit, and you know, as it gets jammier, as the heat years happen. You know, that's Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is like, so you'll notice that this has like tones of Willamette raspberries leading into some lovely Royal Anne cherries, followed by a little bit of Bing. It's like, how many people know what those are? Really. It's a red cherry, a black cherry, it's a raspberry, right? I mean, you know, and so trying to slice the difference between all of those different things, sometimes it's nice just to say, wow, that's just a big old fruity red wine, isn't it? It's and that's, at some point, that's really where we're all at. I just want something that's big and fruity and reaches them up and grabs my shirt collars and says, you're drinking red wine. And that's why people make things other than Pinot, I think.
How have consumers changed in the time you've been making and selling wine? Are there more people like that who are looking for anything but Pinot? Are they more educated in some ways? Are they asking different questions?
I think when you boil down to it, the consumer ultimately has stayed, you know, really the same, right? August Cellars, right now in 2021, not one of my wines is more than $30 a bottle. So if you're coming to the Willamette Valley and you're looking to do the Pinot Noir experience, you're not looking at spending 20 to $30 on a bottle of Pinot Noir. You want to go do the $50 and $80 and $90 bottles of Pinots. You want to be sat down. You want. I mean, the difference is that the wine industry in Oregon has become more Napa-esque. Wait for the door to shut. We sit down. We're going to pair it with food. Rachel Starr, our first winemaker, always said, sell on cheese, buy on bread. Because with a piece of cheese, I can hide any flaw in the wine. You put that piece of cheese in your mouth, you taste my wine, it's like, oh my God, that's great! That's because the cheese is like hiding everything that's wrong with that wine. So as a consumer, you just want to eat the cracker. And you want it to be a non-flavored cracker. You want it to be an oyster cracker. You want it to be a saltine. You want it to be as bland as possible because you want to taste the flaws and decide, is that something I can live with? Mm-hmm. I mean, I knew a winemaker who could never bottle his wine because his wines in barrels, it wasn't quite right. He couldn't compromise and say, it was 1999. The weather was, this way, so it's kind of like this, or what have you. So it was like he couldn't ever manage to just accept that there was a fault and bottle it and say, wow, welcome to vintage variation, which is really the very first thing the very first thing that my distributor in Massachusetts discovered. Right? He was buying 2003 Pinots. It was big. It was wonderful. And we sent him 2004. And his response was, what's wrong with this wine? I said, welcome to the next vintage. It's 2004. He goes, it's so light. If I wanted that, I'd buy French wines. He said, well, yeah, but, it is the next vintage. I mean, I got to do something with it. But it's so light, and there's sediment on the back of the cork. I said, yeah, there was sediment on the back of the cork in 2003. It was just dark and big, and you didn't notice it. Oh, I guess maybe. So he sat there, and he said, okay, well, and then he tried it again 6 months later. He goes, I've really fallen in like with this Pinot Noir. It's like, yeah. I said, but if you're selling it to restaurants, maybe we should skip the 2004 vintage, go to 2005. Because every time you pull that cork, that first pour is going to have sediment in it. It's going to be cloudy, and it's going to get rejected every time. It's like, ugh. Whereas, if you do that first pour and then you do a second pour for the taste, then it would be clear and it would be lovely and light. And 04, 07, 2011, those are the years that were light and cool. And 07 was my favorite vintage that I've ever done. Because it was light and cool and lower alcohol and just beautiful wines. Although 07 was panned on a scale of 1 to 5 as being a 0. When you're judging a vintage in December 2007, there's nothing. You're basing it on winemakers who have never seen rain, who moved from California to Oregon because they want to make beautiful Pinot Noirs. And they're going like, oh my God, it's raining, or it's drizzling. And then the next day it's like, well, it's dry, but it's not dry enough to pick. And then the next day it drizzled, and it's like, well, if you guys are going to like be up in arms, then what's going to happen is that wine critic in California is going to go, oh, the 2007 Oregon vintage, not going to be good. Whereas, 2011 vintage, the Oregon wine industry was prepared for the critics, and so it was the miracle vintage. We had these great videos that we put out about people driving through the fog and the mist and the drizzle and picking fruit, and we all did wonderful things. And it was a cool, cold vintage. 10 was a late vintage as well. I mean, the trick is that you roll with what you have. And yeah. So what did I guess in summary, right? Pinot Noir, education, umlauts.
Yes. If we take nothing else away from this, take away umlauts. Yes. No German wines. Right. Can't sell them. Tell me about you brought up 2020 a bit earlier and the fires. I'm curious. Obviously, two big parts of 2020: the fire, smoke impact at harvest, and COVID earlier in the year. Tell me about the impacts of both those things on kind of your life and business here, and on the industry as you saw it from your perspective.
Oh, I just want to forget 2020. 2020. the smoke rolled in. Boy, it was the wind blew out of the east like nobody's business. It ripped up a third of my roof on my crush deck. So suddenly I was like doing building repair because, well, if the crush line's exposed to the weather, then so trying to get a tarp put over that. It blew over a full-grown walnut tree. It's like this was not a normal harvest. And then my brother, who is my winemaker, passed away unexpectedly at the beginning of October. So I was quite literally left, on my own with 7 winemakers who were willing to, help me as much as they could. So you look around and you say, okay, so what do I have to make wine? What was my brother talking about before he passed? So to deal with the smoke taint, the smoke impact in the Maréchal Foch, all of it becomes port. Okay, still can do that. I know, we've been making port since 2004, 2003. I know when it's time to whack it with the high proof alcohol. I know when it's time to stop fermentation. I know that because we're doing it in a stainless steel jacketed fermenter, that if it looks like that time is going to be at 3 o'clock in the morning, you simply chill it down and the cold temperature will stop fermentation long enough for you to be able to do it the next day. So you anticipate. You got to pay attention to that one. The Gamay Noir, again, I mentioned Chris from August Cellars. He's like, so if you throw in some neutral oak chips, that'll deal with it. Because I didn't have any time to leave the building to go look at any of our vineyards. So we did that with the Gamay Noir. That came out beautifully. I'm so pleased with the Gamay. The Gewürz and the Riesling, didn't do anything really different. They're both wonderful. The belief that the smoke was tied to the sugar, so you take them drier. You didn't maybe squeeze quite as hard. In the press, a lot of the winemakers were, when they started, they were quite literally washing the fruit as it was going in the press to wash the ash off, to wash anything that was on the outside of the grape off. And then we'd start to squeeze, we'd squeeze gently in the press, and they just dumped that first 15 gallons on the floor down the drain. Then we'd close the valve and squeeze until they didn't like it anymore, and we'd stop. So lighter squeezes, which meant it was heavier fruit for putting it, for emptying the press. I'm forever grateful to my vineyard managers who let me, break contract, not just because of the smoke impact, but because my winemaker was dead. Those two things really were gonna, put me over the edge if I had to figure out how to make, 900 cases of Pinot at the same time I'm doing my job, which is running harvest. Because I just left that all to my brother. He would be on the board just like everybody else. He would say, Tom, I have fruit coming in tomorrow. We're going to run the next day. Okay. Tom, I need to press tomorrow. Or I would book. Start the punch down systems. All of those things. And so 2020. It was a lot of rosé was made. A lot of people, what do oak chips. They're the valley ran out of neutral oak chips. There was none to be had. Everybody was going that route. Nobody has yet managed to do any sort of mechanical process to the 2020 so I've seen so far. My 2020 Pinot, I've got 5.5 barrels down there because I went with one. Kept one contract out of the 3 that I had, and I'm going to blend it with a little bit of Zinfandel and a little bit of Foch, and it's going to be a red table wine, and it's going to be this big, wonderful, fruity, big old thing with some Zin and some Foch, and it'll be just fine at $20 a bottle. what was the year? The year of the horrible rains. Was that 96, 90?
Oh, yeah, one of those.
You know, that everybody decided to make their Pinot into red table wine because it was the sugar level was so low, and you know, we were hoping we could cross the Willamette River on the ferry, and you know, at Independence after coming back from Ankeny, because it's like the water was so high. Is the ferry still running today? But yeah, red table wine that year was great. I mean, yeah, it was, you know, some of the best red table wine out there. Could have been Pinot Noir. But nobody wanted to, pardon the pun, dilute the brand of Pinot Noir, and so they turned into a lot of red table wine, or they created second labels that year. Yeah. So I mean, you know, our white wines came through just fine. There's going to be a lot of rosé out there. Their Pinot, our red wines really did pick up some smoke impact, but you know, the port, I think I can make a non-vintage port. I can blend it out. You know, we'll see what it tastes like after 7 years in barrel, and then we'll come back to it. And you know, but I think I mean, truthfully, fires like that in the Willamette Valley are pretty much once in a generation. I mean, the last time we had fires like that in the Willamette Valley was the Tillamook burn, which would have been when my father was a boy. And anything in between was field grass burning, field burning, which doesn't happen anymore. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Nobody talked about smoke taint when we were doing field burning, so that was happening at the same time as the early wine industry. So, there you go.
Well, sorry to hear about Jim, and sorry for your loss. I'm curious with that. What are you doing this year? How are you handling 2021?
So 2021, I have a nephew who is actually on the OSU Extension Agency. He's a staff/faculty member. He's actually their dry farming expert, and has been doing dry farming experiments for the last 3 years on tomatoes and squash and I think garlic. He's going to come in and he's taken a couple of fermentation science courses at OSU. He's worked harvest before, so he's going to come back up. He's the first nephew to bring on board for the family farm, and you know, the big difference is you know, adjusting rates so that I can actually, you know, have him be salaried and paid, because my brother was retired and so didn't need any money, so we never paid him any money. I, however, you know, I was salaried, so I was the one who was running the company here, you know, 5 days a week, and yeah. So you know, we'll bring Matthew on, and he'll get some hands-on learning, and again, you know, it's a master class. So we'll, you know, once again, we'll do Gamay, and we'll do the white wines, and we'll do Maréchal Foch for the last season. I have enough Pinot Noir in inventory in the warehouse that I can afford to once again skip, which is what I'm going to do, because I just can't quite juggle running harvest for 8 winemakers, 7 winemakers, as well as being a winemaker at the same time. I need somebody to actually run the forklift if I'm a winemaker when my fruit shows up, and I don't have that. I haven't hired for that. Since we hire people and we pay people, we don't know what an intern is. Internships are related to educational institutions. So unless we reach out to like Linfield or Chemeketa, I don't know what an intern is, because I think you're supposed to pay people. I don't know. Money, work. You come back the next day. Volunteers are bad. What happens if a volunteer, you know, gets a 2-ton fermenter dropped on his toe? Is there workman's comp there? They were a volunteer. I mean, yeah. So we hire people. Yeah.
We talked about some of your early impressions of Oregon wine earlier. I'm curious about how the industry's changed from your mind. Obviously, long time as a consumer, long time in the industry. What are the biggest differences in Oregon wine now? What has changed the most, and what does the future look like for the industry?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that the industry faces, and as I get older, it becomes a bigger and bigger challenge, is how do you reach out to the consumer and hold on to their attention as all these great little wineries? I mean, if the story that is told by the Oregon Wine Board is the story of David Lett, Papa Pinot, moving here from California. I mean, there really is no mention of Michael Curry in that story, who was already here, who had a nursery, who had a nursery and a wine and a vineyard on the side of a vineyard that was around before Prohibition, of a vineyard that was around and got a medal from the St. Louis World's Fair. But we don't talk about that. That you talk about, that what happens is the big guys, the big wineries, are going to have the marketing money to drive that. And then you're going to have the segmentation, we're already seeing it, of wineries that are, there's no polite way to say this, that are segmented based upon gender and LGBTQ and all of those things. I'm not saying that there's, this is the tough one. This is the one where I'm going to get in trouble. There's the new wineries. There's the wineries that are using who they are as a winemaker to directly appeal to a segment of the population. And so anybody who doesn't want to wear their political beliefs on their sleeves, their sexual preference on their sleeves, who believes that we're just supposed to be nice to each other, and that should be enough. That those are the wineries that are going to get lost. The mom and pop wineries that are over 5 years old, are over, are the Marcia Brady wineries. They're the middle kid. Nobody talks about, gee, look at all these wineries that got started in 2000 or in the late 90s or anybody before 2010. We talk about the new wineries. We want the next big thing. Or it's, we have these wonderful, wonderful out-of-state companies that are going, in order to protect ourselves, we're going to buy land in Oregon and we're going to make Oregon wine because we don't think that where we're at now is sustainable with global warming. And the ones that come here, and then and they bring with them wonderful things. They bring with them lots of dollars, and they really do want everybody to be successful. Mm-hmm. But in the world of social media, there is no clear answer for how do you get your message out there that you are a winery. I mean, if you go and read the Yelp reviews for August Cellars or the Google reviews, they all start with, wow, I was really surprised. Their wine was so inexpensive and so good. It's not what I was expecting. They're expecting somebody who, I don't know, maybe makes bad wine and sells it cheap. Not somebody who's like, well, the whole idea is you should be able to drink wine on a regular basis. You know, if it's not $50, it's not Pinot Noir. It's not a good Pinot Noir. If it hasn't got the stamp of approval from the Wine Spectator or whoever, it's not a good Pinot. Well, if you're out of step with what their marketing program is, you're not going to get that press. You know, the state fair no longer does a professional wine judging competition. You know, why not? Why is that not important? Because that was, you know, well, we all didn't participate. That's probably why it failed. You know, people should say, you know, what's important is things that make all of us successful. You know, people talk about how the big wineries, well, they're taking Oregon Pinot Noir out to everybody else. Bridgeview was doing that long before everybody else. Bridgeview is probably one of the first wineries, even before Willamette Valley Vineyards, to have representation in almost every state. But Bridgeview is a Southern Oregon winery. We don't talk about Bob and Lilo. They're not Willamette Valley. I think that the Willamette Valley has to find a way to make sure that we talk about the other regions as well as we talk about ourselves. You know, my favorite wineries are small. My favorite wineries are the ones where the winemakers are actually really nice people. And those are the things that make a difference. So, you know, so what the wine industry started out was, you know, gee, I kind of want to make wine. I have a real job. I make it on the side. Or, you know, like Ponzi, I'm just going to like starve myself and work myself and my wife and my kids into the ground, you know, and child labor laws won't allow that anymore. You know, but it's always, I mean, you know, the profit margin in a winery is razor thin. You know, I understand my relatives in Nebraska who, you know, farm huge tracts of land, and every year is going to be, they're bordering on the edge of disaster because it's huge cash flow, and it doesn't take much to push that over the edge. You know, and so why do all these little Oregon wineries survive? It's because they're all done by retired people who have an income. They have a retirement income. You know, I made my millions in Microsoft, and now I'm going to do wine. I made my monies as a doctor, and now I'm going to do wine. I have this depth of resources to allow me to do this really horrifically expensive hobby. And you know, and I'll hire some people to do it, and I probably will never pay myself. And I do it because either I love wine, or because it gets my name out there and I'm an ego. So you know, the early days, that's you know, they were all these little wineries that were flying by the skin of their teeth. And you know, the big change was Willamette Valley Vineyards when they, you know, offered their stock option, and suddenly they were well capitalized and they had money, and they could then grow, and they could then look at their stockholders and say, yeah, but you know, you own a winery, it's okay. You get a discount on your wine. Come buy some wine, buy some stock. Come get your stockholders discount. You know, Erath was skin of his teeth, and then he sold. You know, sold when he retired, and you know, his operation was all converted to different barns at different levels, and no flat surface on the whole surface, I think. And you know, Dave Adelsheim didn't manage to put in a tasting room until way late. I mean, beautiful building, no tasting room. Why not? Why not, Dave? But otherwise, there are all these small mom and pop operations that, it's hard to plan for the next generation. I'm so proud of the Kramers. Trudy has got her daughters involved, and that's the transition. And I think that's incredible, and Kim loves sparkling wines, and really, Argyle did sparkling wines, and Kim and Trudy, the Kramers do sparkling wine, and I'd buy Trudy's over Argyle in a heartbeat, because they're doing it by the skin of their teeth, not because there's some major French company that backs it or owns it. All the difference in the world. So that's the differences. August Cellars, we're always going to be a Marsha Brady wine, because we're out of step, and there's no way to make anybody not be in step. I mean, it's the Oregon Wine Board is, winemakers are a bunch of cats. They're, it's impossible to herd a bunch of cats.
So you talked earlier kind of about sort of future for August. So let's talk about sort of looking ahead for yourself and for August Cellars. What do you see? What do you want to have happen for you and for the winery here? And what's the future hold?
Well, let's see. I'm only 58, so and Grandpa lived to be 99, almost 99, and Dad's 87. So I figure I got another good 20 years in me yet. Assuming I can get the right amount of help from my nephews. To me, it's that, how do we hang on to this story of the Schaad family? August Cellars. August was my great-grandfather. He settled in Oregon in 1902. His oldest son, Clarence, my grandfather, moved all the way across the road from him. My grandfather was an iron worker. He apprenticed on the Burnside Bridge, throwing hot rivets to the journeymen out there on the girders. He spent 6 years at the University of Oregon building buildings. He was the foreman on the dome at the state capitol building. Do all the iron work to do all the ironwork there. Back when that burned in 35, 38, somewhere in there. For me, I've got this 42 acres of farmland that I want to keep from being houses. And so what have we done? This year I convinced my aunt and my father that we're going to change from picking on our hands and knees all of our walnuts like we have since my great-grandfather's day. We actually have ordered a mechanical walnut harvester. It has to come from Germany. Hopefully it gets here in time for harvest, but this will be the first year, so completely changing how we farm, no-till. We're going to mow the orchards. It's going to sweep the nuts up. You'll see, one person instead of 12 to do harvest. The challenge is labor. The challenge in a winery is labor. Sorting fruit at harvest is labor intensive. I've always managed to hire a full crew. When needed be, I've hired 2 crews. And so for me, it's like, I like this industry. I like wine. I like visiting with people. I got trees that I like to go play with. I love to drive tractors, right? Let me go drive tractor for a while. Nobody can get a hold of you. Your cell phone, you can't hear your cell phone. It's great. It's great. You're just you and your brain and the trees. It's the best. So hopefully we get the nephews back on board, and the income stream stays solid enough, and Matthew brings some great ideas for the farm, and we push that, and we keep our little 42 acres of farmland. Farmland is the houses creep in around us, because you only get one crop of houses. you know. I mean, he started in 2002, we got here in 2004, it's 2021. I have sat in my winery and I have seen a black-tailed weasel. They're very rare in the Willamette Valley. I've never seen one before, never seen one since. We have a bobcat. We've seen the bobcat's family. There's something about having the bobcat show up in the middle of winter and sitting on the retaining wall while you're in the tasting room, and they're just gorgeous. You know, we've got cougars. There's always coyotes. Apparently there's a bear running around on the hill this year. Haven't seen him yet. But you know, wow, we've got chipmunks. We got bluebirds. You know, you don't get that when you put houses up. When you put houses up, you don't get that. You know, people have to learn to eat. They have to eat. And 42 acres, it's part of it. That's why it's not all grapes, is because walnuts and prunes, berries. I mean, you know, Matthew's looking at how to do dry farming. He's got a bean experiment going on up there. He's got dry farm tomatoes going on up there. You know, what are we going to do for the next 20 years? How do we change? How do we adapt? We're going to face road construction in the next 10 years that's going to threaten the existence of the winery, because they're going to work on the Newberg-Dundee bypass again, and it's going to start before where people turn off the highway to get to me. Will it make it better for me? Maybe. I don't know. It will be painful to go through that 5-year process of the construction. It'll make it easier to get back to the other side of the hill, and you know, because they're going to give me an overpass right outside my front door, which is great because we can't drive farm equipment across the highway anymore like we used to. I mean, traffic has quadrupled since I was in high school. From 1981 to 2020, high school, the traffic on 99 double has multiplied 5 times. Yeah, I mean, so my hope is that I can figure out how to pass this on to the next generation. The next generation wants it. And if not, well, there's some California company that would love to own a 16,000 square foot gravity flow winery. Yeah, so that's what I know.
I like it. That's all the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
I don't think so. I think we got it all in.
Excellent.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Hey,
for your
my pleasure.
thoughts, for your wonderful stories. And we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right.